Tonight, a state lawmaker working to protect free speech rights of licensed professionals in Kansas.
Representative Steve Brunk introduced a bill known as the Professionals Freedom of Expression Act. Thomas Lynch joins us after digging into this bill and breaks down how it could be enforced.
That's right, Mike, Rachel. The bill discusses protection for the expression of beliefs, such as protecting you from losing your license for posting personal beliefs on social media, but it is explicitly talking about religious beliefs, which it says includes but are not limited to marriage, family, and sexuality. I spoke with a lawyer today who says enforcing this bill the way it is written now might be difficult.
The culture is moving in a way that wants to kind of control that expression, and so we feel like we just need to push back a bit.
Republican Representative Steve Brunk says his goal is to allow people the freedom to express their religion.
If you are speaking religiously, specifically held religious beliefs, and you're doing that on your own time, not in conjunction with your professional license, then you're excluded from them trying to come after you.
But according to lawyer Eric Metz, it's not as simple as a First Amendment bill.
If passed, it would still, I think there are ambiguities that would be subject to litigation, but this law would grant rights that the First Amendment does not provide.
He also says some of its wording could be difficult to enforce.
In other contexts, it's been shown very difficult for someone to prove that someone claiming a sincerely held belief was not in fact sincere.
And the issue of what is or is not a religious belief can also be disputed.
It obviously includes marriage, family, or sexuality, so it could include a number of beliefs that could fall under the claimed umbrella of religion.
Brunk says he has already received words of support from licensed professionals for introducing the bill.
This protects those professionals if they want to speak out religiously from having their license threatened or thwarted in any way.
Now, as it currently is written, the bill will not regulate employment, just professional licensing. And if it does pass, it would also provide additional incentives for an employee who believes they were wrong to file a lawsuit. This includes recovery of attorney fees and injunctive relief if they are successful. Brunk says he expects to know if the bill will be heard or not in the next 30 days. Mike, Rachel.